Next up, we have Dr. Michael Hoffman. As I said, he's the Executive Director of Cornell, the Cornell Institute for Climate Smart Solutions.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. How's everybody doing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, some slides. How many farmers in the audience? Any farmers? How many gardeners? Anybody notice any changes for the last 10, 20 years? So I was asked to talk about climate smart farming, and it's essentially adapting farming to today's new conditions. We got warmer weather, longer growing seasons, more downpours, heavy precipitation events, lots of new challenges. I don't get too far into my talk, but also with that, believe it or not, some opportunities. Which one is mine? Not that one.
Yeah.
Try this one. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is just talk about the new program we have at Cornell that's funded in part by federal funds and also a foundation. It's part of the Cornell Institute for Climate Smart Solutions, but it's Climate Smart Farming. Next slide. And it's been around 4 years now. Basically trying to help build resilience into agriculture, and both not just on farm, but kind of the whole social context of what farming's in. And actually the CSF, or the Climate Smart Farming Program, is relatively new, just launched in 2015. There's a research component, obviously an extension, an outreach component, and partnership. This is the trip several of us made to Albany a little over a year ago, trying to market what we're doing. Next slide. And these are actually the goals that are similar to the international program of Climate Smart Agriculture, increase agricultural productivity, maintain incomes, consider food security as an issue in all of this. This is essentially mitigation on farm, reducing energy use, finding alternative modes of production of energy, and down here dealing with more extremes that farmers are dealing with through adaptation practices and best management practices already mentioned, like cover crops, good soil health, minimum till agriculture, interplanting in corn. There's a lot of new technologies coming out to help hold the soil in place that we experience because of these heavy storms and nutrients, and a variety of other things. And water management is obviously really big. Next slide. So just a little refresher on top, it shows that the planting zones that we're all used to as gardeners or farmers have essentially moved north, one full zone. We can grow canola in upstate New York. We could not grow it there in 1990s because winters were too cold. But everything has moved north. The Canadians are happy up in Manitoba. They've expanded grain production enormously because they've got longer seasons. Increase in frost-free, the season length. We gained about 10 days. Frost in spring come a little, get this right. The last one is earlier and the fall is later. We gained about 10 days. The West Coast, almost 20 days in season length. That's a big deal. Here we can maybe double crop, put in longer season corn, a variety of things, and adapt to that. And I think most farmers are researchers and they're really testing the water with these changes. On the right is increase in heavy precipitation events. This is like an inch or 2 inches of rain in 48 hours. We're up 71%. So our total rain precipitation has actually increased a little bit, but it's actually changed in how it's being delivered, so to speak. More downpours, which also means the risk of intermittent droughts is increasing. So just more extreme. A little story from the Midwest. How many have ever had Libby's pumpkin pie mix? Libby's pumpkin pie mix. Most of it's processed and grown within 90 miles of a plant, I believe, in Illinois. In 2012, they had a really, really wet spring. They only got half the pumpkins in. And I think in 2014, they had a very wet fall, and they only harvested half the pumpkins. This is one of the things, is diversify your sources. Don't have them all in the same place. Don't plant the same varieties. There's actually another story out of the Gulf of Mexico for Tabasco sauce. They used to grow all their peppers for Tabasco sauce in one location. Now they have 67 different places from which they source their peppers to ensure they have a supply every year. I guess I'd consider that an adaptation. Next slide. Up on the top is looking to the future and precipitation patterns. I think you can find us in New York. The thatched blue means we'll have adequate, if not a slightly increased level of precipitation on an annual basis. But then you look to the west in the summertime, dry, very dry. There is a 99% chance that the Southwest will experience a 35-year drought before the end of the century. It's called a mega drought. That's a pretty high probability. That's a big deal. You think the food that comes from Mexico and California, they're going to get hit pretty hard. This is where the opportunity for us comes in, because we will still have adequate precipitation. And on the bottom, looking at future temperature projections, looking from roughly 1850 up to 2100, this band captures the average low temperature or high temperature for a year. For every year from 1850 to current times. It all falls in that band. Business as usual, if we keep pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, 2053, the coldest annual year will be warmer than any previous hot year we've ever experienced. We're moving into a new zone. So lots of challenges, we need to help farmers adapt. Next slide. So here, challenges, increased temperature stress on animals and crops, too much or too little precipitation, we've got work on water management, new pests and diseases moving in with these changed conditions, essentially for farming, more risk. But at the same time, we'll have water, longer and warmer growing seasons. We have 22% of the U.S. population in the Northeast. Somebody has to feed them. So do we in fact have the potential to expand and diversify? I think that's something we need to think about strategically. Questions about labor, questions about infrastructure, et cetera, and land availability need to be clarified, but it's something I think quite strongly about that we ought to be investing and looking to the future for agriculture. Here, next slide. This is just kind of a slow diagram of how we operate. We've got the scientists working on the research component. We take that, make it into some tools, new tools for farmers, which I'll show you. This gets out through an extension climate smart farming team, the first in the nation. And farmer feedback is important. And then obviously here we are down to resilience and productivity on farm. It's just kind of the process we use to get information to the farmers and also get their feedback. Next slide. So what I'm going to do now is just take you to the Climate Smart Farming website. Lots of information here. I'll dig a little bit deeper into the various tools. Next slide. So this is the first in the U.S. where we're actually paying a small portion of the salaries of extension educators around the state to dedicate time to climate change. It's not like they're going to hold an evening meeting on climate change, but they're going to talk about it when they're talking about field crops or vegetables or integrated pest management or fruit crops. It just becomes part of their programming. And these are regional specialists, which means they cover areas of the state, not just a county. This is really working very well, very talented. Turns out most of these actually have PhDs, very talented individuals, helping listen to what the needs are, listening to the farmers, and then helping deliver new research and new tools into their hands. Next slide. So on our website, there's lots of information. These are the best management practices, everything from wood management to farming, economic analysis, phosphorus loss, building better soils. This is tapping in USDA, Cornell information, making it all in one place, so you can go to one-stop shopping. Next slide. Here are some examples. Common farm, I don't know, John's going to talk about that. That's managing land. There's forage exchange because of the drought. Some farmers needed forage, and this is a system to, hey, I've got enough forage, I'll sell you some, at least making those connections. The Pro Dairy program actually has tools for heat stress on cattle. If a dairy cow is exposed to high temperatures one day, they actually lose milk production for several weeks. It's not just one bad day. hot cows don't get a lot of milk, as much milk as they should. I think it's costing New York about 25 million a year in lost production. There's connection to NRCS, et cetera. Again, one place to go to look for this kind of information on climate change issues related to on-farm. Next slide. And there's a recent publication out that includes both the Northeast and the Midwest and the resources available to adapt. Next slide. And we've actually interviewed several farmers just to hear their stories. And a lot of farmers won't necessarily say it's climate change, but they sure as heck know the weather is changing. That's okay, and they're adapting to it. There's one farmer that's wants to essentially get off the grid, not because of climate change, he just wants to get off the grid. He wants to be independent. And others really are quite concerned and understand the cause of climate change, and just that's what's driving them making business changes in their business practices. Next slide. So here's some of the tools. Was it 2012, we lost most of our apple crop because essentially it warms up early and then winter returns. And the buds have started to expand and develop, and you get that freeze. There's one applies to apples. There's one somewhat similar for grapes. There's a water deficit calculator, which would have been really nice a year ago when we had the drought, but we weren't quite ready. There's also one in growing degree days, and I'll spend a little bit of time on some of those. And then there's also a connection to the Northeast Regional Climate Center. This is sort of the brains behind the operation. Art De Gaetano is the chair of that, or director of that on campus, and other national and regional programs. Next slide. I'm going to take a minute or two to talk about any fruit growers, apple growers. Okay. Essentially what this is looks like early April through May. You go to this page, you put in your location of your farm. So it's location sensitive. The date of interest is just where do you want this to start, and there's 3 different apple varieties because they're somewhat different in their susceptibility to frost. So the blue line is the minimum temperature, fluctuating around here, as you can see. This is essentially the sensitivity of the crop. As the season starts to warm, buds are breaking, and I think an apple tree will tolerate minus 25 deep in the winter. If it's dormant, it'll be okay. But as spring arrives, the tree becomes more and more sensitive. And out there, when the blue line crosses this line, you've got a problem. That's when the crop is at risk. In this case, it actually gives you a forecast. So that's the advantage of this system. Ultimately, this will be on an app, and a warning will go out. 3 days from now, you got a high risk of loss, and that's essentially what this is saying. If that line crosses, you're going to lose 50%. You have the risk of losing 50% of your crop. Next slide. So that was this is sort of looking at it across the entire season, and you can see this is March of this year. There actually was a period where there was some risk to apples at this location. I actually believe Pennsylvania got hit really hard because their crop was a little bit further ahead, and then the cold came. So we think this is a really valuable tool for our fruit producers to help minimize losses from these unexpected frosts that now seem to be occurring more often. Next slide. So this is the water deficit calculator. It helps someone who has irrigation when to time that irrigation. So essentially, and it incorporates precipitation, evapotranspiration, drainage, and runoff. Here again, put in your location, the type of soil. There's a range of about 15 different crops you put in here, and it'll tell you how stressed that crop will be on a given date. It also projects out 3 or 4 days in the future. So in this case, for these dates, things are just fine. No plant stress. Next slide. This is last year. So here's no deficit. The green area, things are fine, but in fact, plants, this is grass at this point, there was a huge stress on that plant. Here's where it rained one day, But again, looking back across that, it was a tough season last year because of drought. Now, if you had irrigation capability, you could obviously intervene and, remove the stress on your crop. Really important tools because, again, more downpours, but likelihood of intermittent drought is increasing. Next slide. And this one is essentially just takes everything and gives you a 30-day forecast on the water deficit, and it gives you a probability about, there's a 25% chance or 50% chance you're going to fall in this range, 10% even out further. But, instead of just, hey, it's going to get dry, you now have a probability in which to operate and decide on irrigation or not, or no irrigation, or the kind of action. Next slide. And I think this is the last one I'll talk about. It's warmer. Anybody use growing degree day models to kind of predict maturation of crops? It's essentially crops accumulate heat, so to speak, above a base. And because it's warmer, crops are maturing faster. So essentially, in the past, they used to use a 30-year average. Well, things have really changed. So now they use a 15-year running average because as it warms, everything has to get bumped up. So it's essentially, figure this one out. So here's the green, that's the year to date in 2016. And if you look at the 30-year normal, which has been predicted, that's this lower line. Essentially what it's saying is there's a lot more heat out there, the crops are growing much faster. And this would help predict, say, maturation of apples, fruit, anything, corn. It's adjusting, adapting to today's conditions. Next slide. So, I think we're making some progress. We're also very much involved in the USDA Northeast Climate Hub. They were established 3-4 years ago to help coordinate across regions, or 7 across the U.S. To be honest, I'm not sure if the current Secretary of Agriculture is going to continue these. These were supported very strongly by the previous Secretary of Agriculture. We just received a Climate Masters volunteer grant from USDA for $250,000. This is essentially master gardeners, that population, but helping them with climate change. There was a program through the Small Farm program at Cornell, a webinar series called the BF 107 on climate smart farming, trying to get the word out. There's also a program right now, we're doing videos for extension educators across the state. There's 4 of them that I did, they're really good. The idea is these little videos and then a lot of information to back it up. We'll be at Empire Farm Days. There's focus groups that are planned to train, again, the farmers in this tool, but also listen, get their feedback. And this is a question on the bottom. So far, I think Congress has treated us okay, but the future of federal funding for climate change is still a big question, as well as policy. So, questions?
I'm interested to know, is there any talk about your, particularly around the apple growing tools that take into account precipitation and where the water table is? Do you have any additional parameters for like soil organic matter so that, say, the land is able to infiltrate more water in an extreme rain event?
Well, the best way I can answer that is this is apparently one of the most sophisticated models that tries to incorporate all of those factors. I can't specify and tease out each one, but it's pretty comprehensive. So I'm going to guess we're probably coming pretty close to including those kind of factors.
Are you involved in research on like genetic selection of crops to try and develop crops that are going to accommodate the conditions of the past?
I'm not particularly involved, but we have people at Cornell looking at rice, for example, and salt and heat tolerance. They're looking at the whole genetic pool in primarily the U.S., and there's many others, but that's not what I do. But there's that kind of research is underway.
Is there any way that Cornell could help us that live on the lakes get any water out of there for irrigation? I understand there's quite a difficulty.
Yeah, right now you cannot use that water.
I'm on Canandaigua Lake and I got 500 acres there. I've been told that I can't pull it up to irrigate my pastures.
I think the person to your left probably could answer that.
He's been asking her already. I think these tools are fabulous, actually. I'm from Massachusetts, so I'm on my town's water policy committee, and we came within probably 8 days of running out of potable water in my town last year. This is the United States, you know, and I was like, we're within an hour of Boston, and I'm like, we are so close to running out of water. Nobody really knew that in town. People who were involved in it knew it. The people who grow for a living, just a few of us knew it. People who gardeners knew it. Everybody else was like, you know, had their heads in the sand. And one of the tools that I've adopted for my business, so I have a garden design business, is actually using biochar. Because in sand, the biochar helps hold nutrients in water. In clay, it helps, you know, break up the soil so it doesn't just like shed the water, but
Right.
it make, you know, and it does a lot of other really good things. And I think that's going to be key towards helping people shift their properties and their ability to grow crops better in this climate, and be more resilient.
It's what I learned about tillage radishes. Because it breaks up the pan, and I asked the farmer, why are you doing that? He says, because it rains real hard, and that opens up the soil.
Exactly.
I don't know how much time we have.
think
You're
we're
standing up.
Yeah.